Hi guys! I am going to give you an overview of the synthesis essay today. So I know you've heard me mention in class that this is usually the student favorite. That's usually the case because this is really a combination of both rhetorical analysis, the reading components of that, and argument. This is an argument essay. It's much easier though because instead of having to come up with examples on your own, the sources that you will read provide that for you in a lot of ways. So I'm going to go very quickly through this overview of the synthesis, keeping in mind that you can pause this whenever you want, and I do expect you to take your own notes just like you would if we were in class. So let me start going through it then. So what to expect with the synthesis essay? I think I want you to be as familiar as possible. That kind of helps you be successful when you know what's coming. Now, this is hard to do with me talking about it without a visual. Keep in mind I'm going to have you watch a video at the end of this PowerPoint that gives you a visual component, and we're going to be working with one starting next class. So if this doesn't make total sense to you yet, just hang with me here. Now the cover page. So for the synthesis essay, your cover page is going to have an intro paragraph briefly describing a topic as well as different points of view regarding the topic. That's no different than the argument essay. Then instructions as well as the prompt that will either be purely argumentative or an exploratory argument. So let's talk about that and take some notes here. So a purely argumentative prompt, a position, that's what you're used to. So if a prompt said, take a position on how schools should function during a pandemic, straight up argument, you roll with it, okay? Now, if it goes the exploratory route, that's not a lot different, but I want you to kind of focus on what the slight difference would be. So listen to the difference. Take a position on what factors schools should consider when operating in a pandemic. That would be exploratory because you have to identify factors to consider, factors to explore, because the prompt told you to do so. It's still an argument. You're still taking a position, but your thesis is going to be more specific. So watch for that in the prompt. I've seen synthesis prompts worded either way. So just pay close attention to that and make sure that you're answering the question, and you should be fine. Now, after that cover page, you're going to get the sources. There will be 6 to 7 of them, and they're short. The others will be text-based, around 500 words, and 2 will be visual, okay? Now, the visual, what does that consist of? Charts, graphs, pictures, and satire cartoons. You don't spend as much time on a visual usually, but you still have to read it, especially the graphs and charts. You have to read that carefully and closely. And there's a recommended 15 minutes of reading time. So instead of this being a straight up 40-minute essay, there's a suggested 40 minutes of writing time with 15 minutes of reading time. You do not have to use all of that time. Some students prefer to read for 12 minutes and then start writing. Some students prefer to read for 10. Some need more time, need to read almost 20 minutes and then start writing. That's a choice that you make as the writer, but the reading time is certainly important. These 4 bullet points, expectations of your writing, these are the same type of bullet points that we see over and over again. So, I'm not going to spend much time on this because 3 out of 4 you've seen before. You need to respond to the prompt with a thesis. It may establish a line of reasoning. You have to have a line of reasoning in terms of connecting the dots. Now, your thesis doesn't necessarily need to articulate that, but if it's an exploratory thesis, it will need to, because you're going to be naming factors to consider. Explain the relationship between the evidence and thesis. Yeah, you're going to need commentary just like on every single essay that you write in here and making those connections. This is English class. You know you need to use appropriate grammar and punctuation. So let's focus and take your notes from this bullet. Provide evidence from at least 3 of the provided sources to support the thesis. Indicate clearly the sources used through direct quotation, paraphrase, or summary. Sources may be cited as A, B, etc., or by using the description given in parentheses. At least 3. I tell my students you must use at least 4. That way that helps you make sure that you meet that minimum requirement. And I want you using multiple sources per paragraph, and we'll get to that later. You're going to need to pull citing information from sources. It's like a research paper, but the citing is super easy. And I'll go over that with you in class. We'll look at some samples, but you can refer to sources by source A, source B. You can do a parenthetical citation at the end. You just need to give credit where credit is due. You'll notice it says direct quotation, paraphrase, or summary. Now, that should be small bits and pieces of what a claim is saying in a source. And using a variety of, sometimes paraphrasing the source but still giving it credit, and then using a direct quotation later in the paragraph, that just shows your skills as a writer. But again, you're giving credit where credit is due. You're bringing other voices in to support your position. Rubric regulations. There are some rules here. You must use at least 3 of the sources. Otherwise, you can't get a 2 in EC. That's a bottom line. If you only use 2 sources, you must use at least 2 in order to get a 1 in EC. Here's what I want you to write down for notes. We usually don't have students too much trouble with those above rules because you kind of lock your brain into using 3 sources. Summary, in general, is bad. Jot that down. You do not want to summarize, and this paper can sometimes be a trap for students. They read the sources and think, okay, I like source A, I like source B, and I like that chart in source D. So I'll make one paragraph about source A and then source B and source C. No, 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 no. You will not do that. That will not produce a good result. You never want to organize your paragraph or paper by sources. You want to organize your paper by ideas. That's easier to do in an exploratory prompt because you're going to organize them by the factors that you mentioned to consider. You can still do that with an argumentative position by laying out your line of reasoning. But the important thing is that you don't just write me a whole paragraph about source A. You're going to drift into summary, and that's typically results in a 1 in EC. Don't fall for that. You want to make sure, and write this down, you want to make sure to use 2 sources per paragraph. And that has to be done well. You can't just suddenly jam them in and hope that I won't notice that there's no transition there. But again, I'm going to talk about this later, but you want to look for connections between sources and how these are woven together. Okay? So multiple sources per paragraph, backing up your idea. You do not organize by source. You do not summarize sources. 6 steps to success. So I'm going to talk briefly about each of these 6 steps. Where does this come from? The synthesis is actually the newest question on the exam. And this is actually from an article by David Jolliffe, who has been, he's kind of an AP guru, has been the chief reader for a long time, meaning that he organizes the reading, the grading system. So teachers ask, what can we do to help our students? And he gave these 6 steps to success. I'm going to talk about each one with you. Read. You don't write better than you read. Period. I've said that from the beginning of class. This test really looks like it's a writing test, but really it's a reading test. You have to read first. You want to read not only the prompt carefully, but the sources. Remember, a misread can often result in a 2 in evidence and commentary. So your reading game has to be strong before your writing game can even get on the board. Analyze. And really this should say, you might want to write this down, annotate. Annotate the sources. You will be doing the first one virtually via online, so you will have to kind of cite on the computer. You will be doing in second semester, I'll have you handwriting the essays, and then you will mark things from there. I'm doing that because I don't really know what the exam is going to look like in May. They think it's going to go back to paper pencil. I'm not sure about that given our current climate. So I think it's best to practice both ways. Regardless, getting back to analyzing and annotating, you need to read specifically for what's the main claim. If you see a quote you love, you need to underline it. You need to highlight it. You need to think about what data, what evidence is pulled here that you might use in your paper. So you want to read closely and you want to mark it up. Annotate, analyze. Generalize. So whenever you get the prompt, you may take an interest in this. And you may already have a position, and that's great. Sometimes that you're more passionate about the paper that way. And so then you're looking for sources that you can use in your paper that would agree with you or that you would know how to counter. Some of you may read it and you think, I don't care about this topic. This means nothing to me. So then you try to figure out what you can do instead. And then you would read the sources kind of figuring out what your position is. It's happened before where students have said, I wanted to write for this position, but the sources, it seemed to be easier to write for the other. Switch it up. You got to play the game here too. You just want to make sure you take a clear position and you figure out what that is after reading those sources. This is the hardest part of synthesis, and it's also the most important. So if you've been tuning out, tune back in right here. Converse. Conversing. Really think of this as connections. You must make connections between and with the sources. What do the sources have in common? Do you see how a graph might emphasize what is being said in another source? How are they different? Do you see two that are totally countering one another? And can you, as a writer, counter one of the sources? How are they going to contribute to your overall position? This is a really important skill, is bringing in other voices for support. In academic arguments, we don't just say, well, I think so-and-so. You bring in evidence, and this is where you're bringing in that quality evidence, and again, these other voices to bolster your own position. So you need to, again, make strong connections to the sources and think about how you would use them in your paper. Finesse, this is really the writing skills. Your argument must be central, and that's why the sources can't control you. Your paper cannot be dominated by the sources. You use the sources to help support your own position. So we will work on that in class. Remember, just basic quote integration rules apply. You don't just dump a quote in your paper. You don't just drop it in. You have to make sure that you are weaving quotes in with your writing. And you want to make sure to do that because that helps you avoid summary and keeps the focus on what your exact position is. So again, don't let the sources dominate your writing. You dominate the sources. And argue. Overall, this is an argument, and don't lose sight of that. That's really what we're grading. That's still what the rubric is looking at. The only change with this and the argument paper is your source usage. But I want you to note that it is okay, it's often a signature of upper level papers to bring in your own examples. Tie those in with the sources. That is sometimes gold as you are writing these synthesis essays. Okay? Now, that's the 6 steps. The last thing I'm going to have you do here is watch this video. And I'm going to put the link on Schoology so that you can open it up easily with that. And keep in mind that this just provides a visual. It's the old format, it's the old rubric. There's some old rules that don't apply, but it does piece it all together because the question itself is still the same. Now, where are we going from here? The next e-learning class, you're going to practice with an actual prompt. I'm going to have you read the sources. I'm going to have you fill out a chart about the sources. I'm going to have you thinking about an outline and how you'd weave the sources together. That's an assignment that you will do for formative credit. And then you will also bring that in to our next in-person class. We will go over that at the beginning, and I hate to tell you this, it's just the way the schedule falls, but you're going to be doing a writing right as soon as you come back to school. So as soon as we go over this at the beginning of class, I'll take any of your questions. I'm going to have you do a writing. Now, it's a practice, so don't panic. But I have to get you to actually practice it and get a feel for the writing, so then we can use the next few class periods to go over it. We will dissect the prompt, we will score sample essays, we will have you evaluate your own practice essay. We'll do a lot of work to just kind of refine your writing and get going and really get you some experience with synthesis. This is all leading up to your timed writing, synthesis time writing, which will be Monday or Tuesday of the final week, so December 14th and 15th. I went through this super fast, and some of you may be thinking, no lady, you didn't. But anyway, if you need help doing your synthesis work, I'm going to put the Zoom links open. I can work with you as you're going through that. I will be live, so don't hesitate to reach out to me and get some help on that if this just kind of went over your head and is not making any sense. But watch this video. I think that this will help it come together, and then we will go from there. Take care. Have a good day.